I've never been one to believe in the supernatural. Ghost stories, fun, sure, creepy legends, good for campfires, but that was it. My life was ordinary, a desk job in town, my third-floor apartment just far enough from the main drag to be quiet, normal, until the night everything changed. It started innocently enough. A few weeks ago, I'd heard strange sounds coming from the woods behind my building. My apartment faced the trees, and at night, when the wind was still, I'd hear these whispers. Not voices exactly, but not the rustle of leaves either. Almost like the woods themselves were alive, murmuring in some language I couldn't understand. I joked to my girlfriend, Sarah, about it once. She'd laughed and told me to stop watching horror movies. But the thing is, I wasn't imagining it. Not that first night. I'd been working late, staring at my laptop in the dark when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. My window, which overlooked the treetops, framed a slice of pale moonlight, enough to see the black silhouettes of the pines. But there was something else. Something moving. I turned off my desk lamp to kill the glare on the glass. That's why I saw them. They were tall, freakishly tall, the kind of height that made you wonder how bones could even hold up something like that. Their limbs were impossibly long and thin, their heads small in comparison to their twisted, angular bodies. They moved between the trees in jerky, unnatural motions, like puppets on tangled strings. And they were watching me. I froze. My heart started pounding as I realized that one of them had stopped directly in line with my window. Its head tilted, curiously, as if it knew I was there. Its eyes, if they were eyes, glinted faintly, catching just enough moonlight to send a chill down my spine. It wasn't close, not yet, but it was coming closer. I'm not sure what scared me more, the fact that it seemed deliberate, or that the others were following. I didn't know what to do. Call someone. Hide. My phone sat on the desk, but the thought of looking away from the window made my stomach churn. If I moved, if I made a sound, would they notice? Would it draw them closer? I couldn't stay frozen forever, though. My chest tightened as I realized I was holding my breath. Carefully, I reached for my phone. My hand trembled as I dialed Sarah's number. She was staying at her place across town, safe and oblivious to the nightmare unfolding here. As the phone rang, I risked another glance at the window. The thing was closer. My stomach flipped. It was no longer among the trees. It had stepped out into the small clearing just behind the building. There was nothing between us now but distance. Not even that much distance. Its limbs seemed too long for it to move quietly. Yet somehow, it made no sound. Just that awful, deliberate, puppet-like motion. A call went to voicemail. "Sarah, it's me," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think there's something outside. I don't know what. I'm freaking out. Call me back." I hung up and stared at the creature again. For a moment, it stood still, watching, then its head twitched. Slowly, unnervingly, it craned its neck upwards. It was looking at me. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed, staring at the thing through the glass. Every instinct screamed at me to look away, to run, to do something, but my body wouldn't obey. It was as if those awful glinting eyes held me in place, daring me to move. Then it took a step closer. The thing's movement wasn't natural. Its legs bent too sharply, like a spider's, its long arms hanging awkwardly at its sides. And yet, it was impossibly graceful, each step deliberate and soundless. The moonlight cast a sickly glow on its pale, almost translucent skin, and the closer it got, the more I could see the sharp angles of its face, the faint, sinewy lines running under its flesh. It was humanoid, but just barely. A knock at the door broke the spell. I jumped, nearly dropping my phone. My heart hammered in my chest as I turned toward the sound. The knock came again, more urgent this time. My mind raced. Who the hell could it be at this hour? And why now? "Charlie, it's me," a voice called through the door, Sarah's voice. Relief washed over me, so sudden and overwhelming that it almost made me dizzy. I stumbled to the door, throwing a glance back at the window. The thing was still there, its head tilted unnaturally, as if it was watching the door now. I hesitated, hand hovering over the doorknob. Something didn't feel right. Sarah had her own place, miles away. Why would she be here in the middle of the night? And how had she even gotten inside the building without buzzing up? "Charlie, let me in, please. I think something followed me," she said, her voice trembling. My stomach churned. "Sarah," I called through the door, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Charlie, please," she said again, louder this time, almost frantic. "It's out here, Her voice cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear anything. Her breathing, her footsteps, anything. But there was nothing. Just that horrible, oppressive silence. Slowly, I turned back to the window. My blood turned to ice. The creature was gone. For a moment, I stood frozen, torn between fear and disbelief. My fingers still hovered near the doorknob, trembling. What if it really was Sarah? What if she was in trouble? My mind replayed her words, that desperate edge in her voice. I think something followed me. But the silence on the other side of the door nodded me. Something wasn't right. Taking a deep breath, I pressed my eye to the peephole. The hallway was dimly lit, the soft hum of the overhead lights the only sound. It was empty. No Sarah, no shadowy figures. Just an unnervingly still hallway. I hesitated. My gut screamed at me not to open the door, but what if she needed help? Swallowing hard, I reached for the chain lock, sliding it into place before carefully turning the deadbolt. The door creaked as I opened it just a crack, the chain holding it from swinging wide. "Sarah?" I called softly, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The hallway remained empty. I waited, every nerve on edge, half expecting her to step out from the shadows, or worse, for something else too. But nothing happened. My pulse thundered in my ears as I pushed the door shut and locked it again. That's when I heard it, a faint scratching sound, low and deliberate. My breath hitched as I looked down. There, just beneath the door, something pale and thin slid into view. A finger. I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet as the finger wriggled under the door. It scraped lightly against the wood, slow and deliberate, like it was testing the barrier. My stomach churned at the sight of it, a pale, almost translucent digit, unnaturally long and jointed in ways that didn't make sense. My mind raced. What the hell was this? This wasn't human. It couldn't be. The way it moved, the way it felt wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. "Sarah?" I whispered again, my voice cracking. I didn't expect an answer, and I didn't get one. Just more scratching, more wriggling as the finger probed for a way inside. I backed further into the room, grabbing my phone off the desk. I needed to do something. Call someone, anyone. But my hands were shaking so badly, I could barely unlock the screen. I tried Sarah's number again, hoping, praying she'd pick up this time. Straight to voicemail. "Sarah, if you're there, please call me." I whispered into the phone. "I don't know what's happening. There's something outside my door. Please, just call me." I hung up and stared at the door, my mind racing. The finger had stopped moving. For a moment, the silence was almost worse. Then the scratching started again, this time higher up, near the handle. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just testing the barrier anymore. It was trying to get in. A sudden thud against the door jolted me like an electric shock. My chest seized as I stumbled back, clutching the phone like it was some kind of lifeline. Whatever was outside wasn't waiting anymore. The doorframe creaked, the wood groaning as if under pressure. I wanted to scream, to shout for help, but I knew no one would hear me. My apartment building was nearly empty this time of night. The only other tenants in my wing were an elderly couple who wouldn't hear anything over their TV. I was on my own. The scratching stopped, replaced by a low, rhythmic tapping. It wasn't frantic or angry, but deliberate, like a code being knocked into the wood. I could feel the vibrations through the floorboards. My stomach twisted as I realized the tapping wasn't random. It was thinking, "Who are you?" I croaked, my voice barely audible. I wasn't sure if I wanted an answer. I didn't understand what it meant, but the sound filled me with dread. My body acted on instinct, and I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a cast iron skillet from the kitchen. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The door rattled again, this time harder. The tapping stopped. Then, with a sickening creak, the door began to give. The chain strained against the force, but I could see the gap widening. My breath caught as something slipped through, a hand, impossibly long and clawed, reaching for the lock. I didn't think. I swung the skillet with everything I had. It connected with a sickening crunch, and the hand jerked back, leaving a smear of pale, almost luminescent fluid on the door. The chain snapped back into place, the gap slamming shut. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a sound that chilled me to my core, a low, guttural growl vibrating through the wood like a living thing. It wasn't done with me yet. Growling faded, replaced by a heavy, dreadful quiet. I stood there, clutching the skillet, every muscle in my body screaming for rest but refusing to relax. My eyes darted between the door and the window. Nothing moved. And then I heard it. The sound of wood splintering, coming from down the hall. A crash, followed by something heavy hitting the ground. I ran to the peephole, pressing my eye to the glass. The hallway was empty, but I could hear it now, movement, muffled screams. A door slammed open. My stomach turned as I realized it was coming from the elderly couple's apartment. "No," I whispered, panic flooding my veins. I couldn't just stand here. I had to help them. But what could I do? My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock, sliding the chain free. I stepped into the hallway, skillet raised, and crept toward the source of the noise. The door to the couple's apartment was wide open, the frame shattered. Inside, the shadows danced unnaturally, writhing and twisting as if alive. The muffled scream stopped abruptly, replaced by a wet, tearing sound. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then I saw it, the creature, crouched over something on the floor. It turned its head slowly, those faintly glowing eyes locking onto mine. I ran. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I was back in my apartment with the door slammed shut and bolted. My breath came in ragged gasps as I collapsed against the wall. I'd been too late. The couple was dead. The hours dragged by in a haze of terror. I didn't sleep. I barely moved. The sounds from the hallway grew quieter, the oppressive silence returning. When dawn finally broke, I heard voices, human voices. Relief washed over me as I realized it was the police. I stumbled to the window, peering out as patrol cars and an ambulance pulled into the lot below. Officers moved cautiously, their hands resting on their holsters. I could hear them talking about a disturbance, about calls from other tenants who'd heard that part of me wanted to rush downstairs to tell them everything. But how could I explain what I'd seen? They'd think I was crazy, or worse, they'd investigate and end up like the couple. A knock on my door startled me. I flinched, heart racing, but it wasn't the same as before. This knock was firm, authoritative. "Police," a voice called. "We need to ask you a few questions." I hesitated, then opened the door a crack. An officer stood there, his expression grim. Behind him, another was speaking to a woman from the apartment next door. She looked pale, her hand shaking as she gestured down the hall. "Sir, did you hear anything unusual last night?" the officer asked. His tone was calm, but I could see the tension in his eyes. He already knew the answer. I nodded. There was noise from the end of the hall. Screaming, "Did you see anything?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. "No, I didn't see anything." He nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "All right. If you remember anything else, let us know." As he turned to leave, I asked, What happened to them?" His jaw tightened. "We're still investigating, But I already knew. The elderly couple was gone, and it was my fault. I should have done something. I should have warned them. When the police left, I couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air too thick to breathe. I packed a bag and got in my car, my hands gripping the wheels so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had to see Sarah. She was the only person who could make sense of this, who could help me figure out what to do. I didn't even call her first. I couldn't risk her not answering. I just drove, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see those long, twisted limbs trailing behind me. The roads were empty, the morning sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. Every shadow looked like it could spring to life, like it could reach out and drag me back to that nightmare. I pushed the thought away, focusing on the road ahead. When I finally pulled up to Sarah's apartment, I felt a sliver of relief. Her car was in the driveway, and the lights were on. She was home, safe. I ran to the door and knocked, glancing nervously over my shoulder. When she opened it, the sight of her nearly brought me to tears. "Charlie, what's wrong?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "I don't even know where to start," I said, my voice trembling. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside, and I entered, the weight of the night still pressing down on me. But for the first time in hours, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe together, we could figure out how to stop this. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. When Sarah let me in, I couldn't hold it together anymore. The fear, the guilt, the sheer madness of what I'd seen poured out of me like a flood. She listened quietly at first, her face growing more serious with every word. I told her everything. The strange sounds in the woods, the tall, twisted creatures, the attack on the elderly couple. I even confessed that I'd lied to the police, that I was too scared to tell them what I'd really seen. "I don't know what it is, Sarah," I said, my voice shaking. "But it's not human, it's not from here." She sat across from me on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes darted to the windows more than once, and I could tell she was trying to piece it all together. "Charlie," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. "You're exhausted. You've been through something terrible. But you're safe now. We're safe. Nothing's going to happen here." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But the memory of those glowing eyes, the way it had moved, kept flashing in my mind. I stayed with Sarah for the next 2 days. She insisted it would do me good to rest, to get some distance from my apartment and whatever had happened there. At first, I tried to stay vigilant, jumping at every creak or gust of wind, but Sarah's presence was grounding. For a little while, I let myself feel normal again. But the third night, everything fell apart. It was just past midnight when I woke up to the sound of glass shattering. At first, I thought it was a dream. My mind was foggy with sleep, but as the seconds passed, I heard it again, a heavy, deliberate crunch, like something stepping through broken glass. I bolted upright, my heart hammering in my chest. Sarah stood beside me, groaning softly. "What was that?" she mumbled, still half asleep. "Stay here," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I grabbed my phone and crept toward the bedroom door. The house was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside. My pulse raced as I stepped into the hallway, the shadows stretching and shifting like they were alive. That's when I saw it. A creature stood in the living room, its grotesque, angular frame silhouetted against the broken window. Its head twitched unnaturally as it turned toward me, those faintly glowing eyes locking onto mine. My breath caught in my throat. It had followed me. "Sarah, run!" I screamed, backing away. The creature moved fast, too fast for something so tall and spindly. It lunged toward the hallway, its limbs contorting unnaturally as it crawled on all fours. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with terror. "Charlie, what?" It grabbed her before she could finish. One of its impossibly long arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her off the ground like she weighed nothing. She screamed, thrashing and kicking, but it was no use. The creature turned and leapt back toward the broken window, dragging her with it. "No!" I shouted, running after them. I grabbed a chair from the kitchen and hurled it at the thing, but it barely flinched. Desperation clawed at me as I watched it disappear into the night, Sarah's screams fading into the distance. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just ran. The cold night air bit at my skin as I chased the creature into the woods behind Sarah's house. My phone was still in my hand, but I didn't stop to call for help. There was no time. The trees closed in around me, their gnarled branches blocking out the moonlight. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for rest, but I pushed forward, following the faint trail of broken branches and disturbed leaves. Somewhere ahead, I could hear Sarah's muffled cries, her voice growing weaker with every passing second. "Let her go," I shouted, my voice raw with fury. The creature didn't respond. It moved like a shadow, silent and impossibly fast. But I wasn't going to let it win. Not this time. I spotted a fallen branch on the ground, thick and heavy enough to use as a weapon. Gripping it tightly, I pressed on, the adrenaline drowning out my fear. The trail led me to a small clearing, the moonlight illuminating the creature as it crouched over Sarah's limp form. "Get away from her!" I roared, charging forward. The creature turned to face me, its glowing eyes narrowing. It rose to its full height, towering over me like a living nightmare. But I didn't stop. I swung the branch with everything I had, the impact sending a shockwave up my arms. The creature staggered back, a guttural hiss escaping its twisted mouth. It lashed out with one of its claws, catching my shoulder and sending me crashing to the ground. Pain exploded through my body, but I forced myself to stand. "You're not taking her," I growled, gripping the branch tighter. This wasn't over. Not yet. The woods seemed endless, the trees closing in around us like a living trap. Every step felt like a battle against the darkness and the fear clawing at my mind. Sarah was a dead weight in my arms, but I refused to let go. If I could just make it to the road, to the lights, maybe someone would see us, maybe we'd have a chance. But the creature was relentless. It crashed through the underbrush, its guttural growls echoing through the night. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately regretted it. It was closer now, its glowing eyes burning like embers in the darkness. "Help!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. "Somebody, help us!" The words felt futile. Who would hear us out here? Who would believe us? A root caught my foot, and I stumbled, nearly dropping Sarah. The creature seized the opportunity, its clawed hand swiping inches from my back. Desperation surged through me, and I pushed myself forward, ignoring the pain, the exhaustion, the terror. Then I saw it, a car, its headlights cutting through the trees. The road was just ahead. "Hold on, Sarah," I whispered, my voice breaking. "We're almost there." The creature roared behind me, its rage palpable. I burst through the tree line, the asphalt cool and solid under my feet. I ran straight for the car, waving my arms frantically. "Stop, please." The vehicle screeched to a halt, the driver's wide-eyed face illuminated by the dashboard lights. He looked between me and the woods, confusion turning to horror as the creature emerged from the trees. "Get in," the driver shouted, throwing open the passenger door. I didn't hesitate. I shoved Sarah into the back seat and jumped in after her, slamming the door shut. "Drive. Go," the man didn't need to be told twice. The tires squealed as the car lurched forward, the creature lunging after us. It slammed into the back of the car with a force that nearly sent us spinning, but the driver kept control, speeding down the empty road. "What the hell is that?" the man shouted, his hands gripping the wheels so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I don't know," I gasped, clutching Sarah's hand. "Just keep driving." The creature chased us for what felt like an eternity, its unnaturally long limbs propelling it forward with terrifying speed. But gradually, the distance between us grew. The headlights of another car appeared in the distance, and the creature slowed, its glowing eyes narrowing before it disappeared into the trees. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his face pale. "Are you two okay?" "She's hurt," I said, my voice trembling. "We need to get to a hospital." He nodded, pressing harder on the gas. "We're almost to town." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. I knew this wasn't over. The creature was still out there, waiting, watching. And it wouldn't stop until it got what it wanted. The aftermath. The hospital was a blur of bright lights and urgent voices. Sarah was rushed into surgery, and I was left alone in the waiting room, my clothes torn and blood-stained. The adrenaline that had kept me going finally wore off, leaving me shaking and hollow. The police came to question me, but I could barely speak. How could I explain what had happened? They wouldn't believe me. Hell, I could barely believe it myself. When the doctors finally came out, their expressions were grave. "She's stable," one of them said. "But she's in critical condition. We're doing everything we can." I nodded numbly, the weight of guilt pressing down on me. This was my fault. I had brought this nightmare into her life. As the hours dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched. Every shadow in the corner of the room seemed to shift, every creak of the floor made my heart race. The creature was out there, and it wasn't finished with us yet. When Sarah finally woke up, her voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. "Charlie, what happened?" I took her hand, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry," I said. "I should have protected you." She shook her head slightly, her eyes searching mine. "It wasn't your fault." But I couldn't accept that. Not after everything she'd been through. As she drifted back to sleep, I made a silent vow. I would find out what this thing was, where it came from, and how to stop it. I wouldn't let it hurt anyone else. No matter what it took, I would end this nightmare.